I pulled into the motel lot just after dark, worn out from driving all day. I hadn't planned on stopping there, but the stretch of highway I was on didn't have much else, and I was too tired to push on. The place sat just off the road, a low row of rooms with a faded sign that buzzed faintly in the night. Only a couple of the neon letters still worked, so it didn't even spell the name right. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through, and the yellow light poles scattered across it flickered like they were on their last legs. I counted only 2 other cars parked near the rooms, so the place seemed mostly empty. I grabbed my bag and went inside the office to pay for a room. The lobby was small and smelled like stale air mixed with cleaning spray that didn't quite cover something underneath. The carpet was worn flat in spots, and a buzzing vending machine hummed in the corner. After signing in, I was handed a key to one of the rooms toward the far end of the row. When I walked over, the air felt heavy, like the night was pressing down harder than usual. My footsteps echoed off the walls as I carried my bag. The door to my room was scratched up, and the paint was peeling around the handle. The key turned stiffly, and when I pushed the door open, the smell hit me first. It was like damp carpet mixed with cigarette smoke, something that had been stuck in the walls for years. Inside, the room looked just as tired as the outside. The bedspread was patterned with faded flowers, thin and stretched out. The carpet was stained in spots, and the lamp on the nightstand leaned slightly. The bathroom door didn't close all the way, and the curtain over the window hung uneven, barely covering the glass. Still, it was a place to crash, and that was all I needed. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down, letting myself rest. The springs in the mattress squeaked under my weight. I pulled off my shoes, stretched, and thought about showering, but the idea of stepping barefoot onto that floor turned me off. I decided I'd just wash my face and go to sleep. As I lay back, I noticed how thin the walls were. I could hear the muffled sound of a TV somewhere down the row, and every car that passed on the highway outside seemed to rumble through the room. After a while, I started to drift, but then I caught something that set me back up. It was faint, but I swore I heard footsteps outside, right along the walkway in front of the rooms. I figured it was just another guest heading to their door, but the sound didn't stop where I thought it would. Instead, it lingered, slow, like someone was pacing right in front of my room. I stayed quiet, listening. The steps moved away after a while, and I let myself relax again, telling myself it was nothing. I turned off the lamp, laid in the dark, and pulled the covers up. But my ears kept working, even when I wanted to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was just the TV again, but then I realized it was closer, sharper. It was the sound of a door handle being tried. I froze. The handle rattled lightly, then stopped. My chest tightened as I lay there in the dark, holding my breath. Whoever it was, they weren't at my door anymore, but I heard another rattle farther down the row, like someone testing the next door. I didn't move. I just listened as the sound carried on, one door after another, slow, steady, then silence. I told myself maybe it was a drunk guest, maybe someone who got confused about which room was theirs. I clung to that idea, though it didn't sit right. I tried to sleep again, but every little noise made me flinch. Hours seemed to crawl by. Just when I started to feel like I was slipping into rest, I heard something else. This time, it was outside my window. A faint crunch of gravel, a slow step, then another. The curtain didn't cover the whole window, and a thin strip of light leaked in from the lot. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, afraid to look. My mind ran through all the things that could be out there. Someone smoking, someone on their phone, someone just wandering around. But the steps stayed close, circling near my window, too close to be casual. I finally sat up and glanced at the curtain. Through the gap, I thought I caught the outline of movement like a shadow passing by. My heart hammered. I grabbed my bag and pulled it close to me, just in case I had to bolt. After a while, the sound faded again. I sat there for a long time, wide awake, clutching my bag, watching that strip of light. Nothing else happened for a while, and slowly, against all my fear, I must have dozed off again. The next time I woke, it wasn't to footsteps. It was to silence, but the kind that feels wrong, like everything is holding its breath. My throat was dry, and when I sat up, I realized the air in the room felt colder. I checked the clock. It was just after 4 a.m. I rubbed my face, thinking maybe I was just working myself up, when I heard a new sound. This time it was from inside. A faint creak, like the floor shifting under weight. My whole body froze. I told myself it was the old building settling, but then it came again, closer, like it was from the corner of the room near the bathroom. I didn't move for several minutes. I just sat there in the dark, ears straining. The silence stretched, then another soft sound, like fabric brushing against the wall. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. That was enough. I grabbed my shoes, didn't even tie them, and stuffed my bag under my arm. My hand shook as I unlocked the door. The second it clicked, I yanked it open and stepped into the night air. The lot was empty and quiet, the lights buzzing overhead. I didn't even care if anyone saw me. I went straight to my car, threw my bag inside, and got behind the wheel. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced back once. Most of the rooms were dark, except for 2 doors down from mine, where the curtain moved slightly even though no one was outside. I didn't wait to see more. I drove back onto the highway, my chest still pounding. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, but I felt safer out there than I had in that room. The thought of lying back down in that bed, with those sounds in the walls and that shadow outside the window, made my skin crawl. I drove until the sun started to rise, the sky turning gray, before I finally found another place to stop. That night stuck with me. I can't say for sure what was happening in that motel, but I know what I heard and what I felt. Those footsteps outside, the handles being tried, the sounds inside when I was supposed to be alone. It wasn't just in my head. Something wasn't right there. Since then, I don't stop at places like that anymore. If it looks run down, if the lot is too empty, if the office smells stale and the lights buzz overhead, I keep driving. Because whatever was in that room with me, or outside of it, I don't want to ever be that close again. I had planned that overnight hike for weeks. It was supposed to be quiet and simple. Just a single night in a small wooded valley that branched off into a web of smaller valleys. I'd looked at maps, watched a few topographical videos of the area, and even marked where I'd set up camp. It wasn't deep wilderness, but far enough that cell signal would be spotty, and the stillness was something I wanted. I packed light, just my tent, sleeping bag, a tarp rolled up and strapped under my pack, some food, and a small gas stove. The plan was to hike in before noon, set up camp near a creek I'd seen on the map, and enjoy some solitude. The day started calm. The morning air was cool, and the ground still held some dew from the night before. The valley was narrow, maybe half a mile across, with steep wooded hills rising on both sides. The trees were mostly spruce and pine with patches of dry grass that had turned almost yellow from the late summer heat. The trails twisted up and down through those connecting valleys, and I liked how easy it was to feel isolated out there. I could go an hour without hearing anything except the occasional rustle of leaves or a distant bird call. By early afternoon, I was several miles in, making my way along a ridge that curved toward the west. The air was warmer now, and I'd stopped twice to drink from my water bottle. At one point, I caught the faint smell of smoke, but I didn't think much of it. It's not unusual that time of year. Farmers burned grass or cleared brush around there, and sometimes the smell carried far. I remember thinking it was probably one of those small controlled burns. I kept hiking, the trail sloping gently upward until I came over the top of a small rise. That's when I saw it. Down in the main valley, maybe half a mile ahead, was a line of fire. At first it looked like a small patch, just a few tongues of flame in the grass. But when I stopped and looked harder, I realized it wasn't small at all. It stretched across the valley floor, crawling fast through the dry grass and moving toward my direction. It wasn't a wall of flames yet, but it was spreading fast, the smoke curling upward in thick, brownish waves. I just stood there for a few seconds, watching it move. The fire seemed almost alive, eating through everything in its path. My stomach sank as I realized how quickly it was heading uphill. The dry wind was pushing it hard, and the slope was feeding it oxygen. I didn't have much time. I turned around and started back the way I came, but the smoke was already spreading overhead. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying bits of ash past me. That was when I understood I wasn't going to be able to outrun it uphill. I needed to move sideways, maybe find one of the connecting valleys that led down and away from the main fire. I started running, my pack bouncing against my shoulders, boots slipping on loose dirt. The sound behind me grew louder, a deep crackling that never stopped. It was like the woods themselves were whispering, then shouting. I could smell the smoke strongly now, and my eyes started to sting. I could see orange flashes through the trees behind me as I moved along the edge of the ridge, trying to find a way down. The problem was the ridge ended in a steep drop. I came to the edge and saw that the ground fell away sharply, maybe 100 feet down into another narrow valley. There was no way to climb down safely there. It was all rock and scrub. I followed the edge, running parallel with the fire, hoping I'd find a slope or a break in the ridge where I could get down without killing myself. The heat was coming faster now. The smoke was thicker, swirling around me, turning the sunlight a dim orange. The ground under my boots felt dry and brittle. Every time I breathed, my throat burned a little more. I knew that if I hesitated too long, I could end up trapped. After what felt like forever but was probably just a few minutes, I spotted a break in the ridge where the ground sloped downward. It wasn't much. It was still steep and full of loose dirt and small rocks, but it looked like the only way out. I dropped to the ground, half sliding, half crawling. The dirt tore under my gloves, and rocks skidded out ahead of me. My backpack kept throwing off my balance, but I couldn't stop to adjust it. I just kept sliding and scrambling, trying not to tumble headfirst. When I finally reached the bottom, my legs were shaking. My hands were covered in dirt and small cuts. I turned and looked back up. The ridge was a line of orange and gray now, the fire racing along the top. The noise was constant, like the sound of heavy wind mixed with breaking wood. Ash was drifting down around me. I moved farther down the valley, away from the slope, until I reached a narrow stream bed. It was mostly dry, but there were still patches of damp mud along the edges. I followed it for maybe half a mile, just trying to put as much distance between me and that fire as I could. I stopped once, leaning against a tree, breathing hard. The air was thick with smoke, and everything smelled like burning pine. When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I dropped my pack to the ground. That's when I noticed something strange. One corner of the tarp I had rolled up under the pack was melted. It wasn't a big hole, but the material was warped and stiff, and part of it looked like it had been brushed by fire. I realized how close the heat must have been to reach me like that. I remember just staring at it for a while, trying to calm my breathing. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, listening to the distant sound of crackling and snapping wood. The wind shifted again, and the smell of smoke faded slightly, but I could still see a dull orange glow above the ridge. The sun was starting to dip lower, turning everything into a strange reddish light. I'd originally planned to set up camp somewhere along the lower creek that night, but that plan was gone now. There was no way I was sleeping out there, not with that fire still moving through the area. I decided to hike out while there was still daylight. My map showed a rough trail that looped back toward the highway if I followed the main valley east. It took a while to find it again, but eventually I reached a broader path with faint tire marks, maybe from ATVs or maintenance trucks. My legs were sore, and I was covered in sweat and ash, but I kept walking. The woods were strangely quiet now. Even the birds were gone. Every now and then I'd hear the faint sound of trees collapsing somewhere behind me, but the further I went, the more it faded. The smell lingered though. Burned grass, smoke, and that strange dry heat that clings to your clothes long after it's over. It was full evening by the time I reached the small gravel lot where I'd parked. The sky was hazy and dull, the last of the sunlight glowing faintly behind the smoke. My throat felt raw, and my clothes were damp from sweat and soot. I set my pack down next to the car and just stood there for a moment, staring back at the dark shape of the ridge I'd come from. I could still see a faint orange light flickering through the trees up there. It looked so far away now, but I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been just hours earlier. I opened the trunk, unstrapped the melted tarp, and tossed it inside. The edge was stiff and dark, the nylon bubbled from heat. I drove away not long after, windows down to let the smell out. The road curved away from the valley, and soon I couldn't see the glow anymore. The fire would probably burn through the rest of that section by morning, and maybe someone would report it. But I didn't stay to find out. By the time I reached the small town near the main road, it was fully dark. I pulled over once, just to sit there in the quiet and take a breath. The adrenaline was gone, and everything felt heavy. My limbs, my chest, my head. I kept thinking about how I'd stood on that ridge, watching the fire come closer, not realizing how fast it could move. I didn't go back to that valley after that day. I never even finished the trail I'd planned. Every time I thought about it, I could almost smell that burning grass again, see the melted edge of the tarp, feel the heat on the back of my neck. It wasn't the kind of danger you could see creeping up slowly. It came fast, alive, and there was no time to think. That hike was supposed to be peaceful, but when I think back on it now, all I remember is that sound. The deep, steady roar of fire eating through everything, the ground shaking under my boots as I ran, and the strange, empty silence that came after it was all behind me. I had gone hiking alone that morning, sometime in late October. The air was cool and dry, the kind of mountain air that makes your lungs ache a little when you first start breathing it in. I was somewhere near the base of the Cascades, a remote part of the range where few people hike after the summer ends. The trail was narrow and covered in fallen leaves, damp and soft from the night's dew. The forest had that quiet stillness that only happens in the colder months. No insects buzzing, no human noise anywhere. Just wind moving through the trees and the occasional drip of water from branches. I remember the smell of pine needles and earth, how everything had that faint, cold scent of decay mixed with rain-soaked bark. My plan was to follow a long loop trail that circled around a ridge and came back near the highway. It was about 9 miles. I had a small pack, some food, and a can of bear spray just in case. I wasn't expecting to see anything more than maybe a few birds or a deer at a distance. The first few hours were peaceful. I stopped at a small clearing where the sunlight broke through and warmed the ground. The view from there was incredible. The trees dropped off into a valley that was filled with fog like a white lake. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. That stillness was calming but also strange. It was the kind of quiet that makes you aware of how alone you are. Around noon, I started heading back down the other side of the ridge. The trees here grew closer together, darker, thicker with moss. The ground was uneven, full of roots and small rocks hidden under the leaves. I remember feeling like I was being watched, though at first I thought it was just my imagination. I had been hiking for hours and hadn't seen a single person. My phone didn't have service, and the only sounds were my boots and the occasional crow calling somewhere far off. I was halfway down a steep part of the trail when I noticed movement in the corner of my vision. I froze. About 50 feet ahead of me, just beyond a fallen log, something tan-colored slipped between the trees. It was silent, almost ghost-like in the way it moved. I stood completely still, staring. Then I saw the long tail swish once. My stomach dropped. It was a cougar. I had never seen one in the wild before, but there was no mistaking that shape. It was big, muscular, and low to the ground. It wasn't running away. It was watching me. I could feel the weight of its stare even though I couldn't see its eyes clearly yet. My mouth went dry. I I remembered all the warnings about what to do. Don't run, make yourself look bigger, stay calm. But in that moment, my body didn't want to move at all. The cougar started walking slowly toward me. Its movements were so smooth that they barely made a sound, just a faint rustle in the leaves. I raised my arms and tried to look tall, gripping my trekking poles tight. My voice caught in my throat when I tried to yell. I knew I couldn't turn my back on it, but I also couldn't keep standing there forever. My heart was hammering so hard that I could hear it in my ears. It took another step closer, and I saw its face. Those sharp eyes, fixed right on me. Its muscles shifted under its fur, and I knew it was close enough to spring if it wanted to. My brain was screaming to do something, but my legs felt heavy, locked in place. I slowly started to back away, keeping my eyes on it. Every step felt like walking on thin glass. That's when something unexpected happened. A loud crack came from the right side of the trail. I turned my head just enough to see a deer burst out from the trees. It wasn't far, maybe 20 yards away, and it was running fast, crashing through the undergrowth, its hoofs pounding the ground. The sudden noise startled me, but it startled the cougar even more. The big cat's head snapped toward the sound. Crouched low, muscles tight, tail flicking. The deer wasn't running away from us. It was actually cutting across the trail, almost between me and the cougar. I don't know if the deer saw me or not, but it darted out with a kind of frantic energy that sent branches flying. The cougar shifted, indecisive for half a second, and then it lunged in the direction of the deer. The two disappeared into the trees so fast that I barely had time to register what was happening. The forest exploded with sound, branches snapping, hoofs pounding, a deep growl, then silence. I stood there shaking, still staring at the spot where they had gone. My breathing was loud and uneven. I waited for several minutes, not sure what to do. I kept expecting the cougar to come back, but it didn't. The woods grew still again, and the only sound left was the faint wind through the trees. After a long time, I started moving again, slowly at first, keeping my bear spray in my hand. Every sound made me jump. I didn't see either animal again, but a few hundred feet down the trail I noticed disturbed ground. Clumps of fur, some broken branches, and hoof prints scattered in circles. It looked like there had been a struggle there. I didn't want to get closer. I picked up my pace and didn't stop until I reached a wider section of trail closer to the highway. The adrenaline had drained out of me by then, leaving me exhausted. My legs were shaky, and I could barely think straight. I sat down on a rock for a minute, trying to take in what had just happened. The reality hit me then, that cougar could have killed me easily. If that deer hadn't come through when it did, I don't think I would have had time to use the spray. When I finally made it back to my car, I sat there for a long time before turning the key. The whole forest looked different to me then, beautiful but sharp-edged, alive in a way I hadn't understood before. I thought about that deer. Maybe it hadn't meant to help me at all. Maybe it was just running its own race, trying to survive like everything else out there. But whatever it was doing, its timing had saved me. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the memory of those few seconds. The cougar's silent approach, the rush of the deer, the noise of it all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. That blur of tan muscle and the flash of white tail disappearing into the trees. It made me realize how thin the line really is between safety and danger out in the wild. I went back hiking weeks later, but never alone again. I carried a bigger can of spray and made noise as I walked. Still, every time I step into the woods now, I think about that moment, the exact second when a random deer, acting out of nothing but instinct, ran through at the right time and changed everything. I know that the cougar could have gone either way, could have ignored the deer and kept coming for me, but it didn't. For reasons I'll never understand, that wild animal turned its attention elsewhere, giving me the chance to walk away. The memory stays with me not just as fear, but as something strange and humbling. Nature doesn't think about us, doesn't plan or care who survives. But sometimes, even without intention, it spares us. And because of that, every time I see a deer now, standing quiet at the edge of a field or crossing a road at dusk, I stop for a second and watch it disappear into the trees. I think about how easily I could have been gone that day, and how something as simple as a frightened deer crashing through the woods gave me another chance to walk out alive. I had been driving across the state for most of the day, one of those long stretches of highway where every mile looks the same and the landscape hardly changes. My eyes had been burning for hours, my body stiff from sitting too long, and I had been telling myself I'd push through to the next town. But as the sun went down and the sky turned into that deep, heavy blue, I knew I wasn't going to make it any farther. When I saw a flickering neon sign in the distance, standing crooked just off the highway, I decided that was it. I would stop for the night. The sign said motel in half-lit letters, with most of the tubes burned out. Only the M and the T worked, buzzing faintly, leaving the rest in shadow. The building was a long row of single-story rooms, all lined up under the same overhanging roof. The parking lot was cracked, weeds growing through the lines, and the only cars there looked like they hadn't been driven in weeks. A dented pickup sat crooked near the office, and an old sedan with a missing hubcap was parked way down at the end of the row. Other than that, the place was empty. I pulled in and parked in front of the office. The glass door was smudged and greasy, and the blinds behind it were bent in different directions, letting a pale glow of light leak out. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with something sour underneath. The floor was sticky in spots, and a vending machine hummed in the corner, stocked with faded bags of chips and bottles of soda that looked like they'd been there for years. I paid for a room and was given a key on a cracked plastic tag with the number 8 written on it. The key was heavy in my hand, the kind you knew hadn't been replaced in decades. I walked back out into the dim parking lot, the buzzing light poles throwing weak circles of yellow across the cracked asphalt. My footsteps echoed off the building as I carried my bag to my room. The door to number 8 was scratched around the handle, as if people had fumbled keys at it for years. The paint was chipped and bubbled, the metal lock a little loose. When I turned the key and pushed the door open, the air inside hit me first. It was stale and damp, like mildew mixed with old cigarette smoke that had sunk into the walls. The carpet was dark and stained in places, the kind of floor where you didn't want to take your shoes off. The bed was against the wall, covered with a faded floral blanket that looked thin and frayed at the edges. I set my bag down on the chair and tried not to think too much about the smell. The air conditioner under the window was rattling, blowing weak, dusty air into the room. The bathroom door was crooked on its hinges, the mirror spotted with streaks, and the light above the sink flickered when I turned it on. Everything in the room felt like it had been used too many times and never really cleaned. Still, I was too tired to care. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the springs creak under me, and pulled off my shoes. My body ached, but the thought of crawling into that bed made my skin crawl. I told myself I'd just rest for a bit, maybe sit up until I felt ready to sleep. That was when I noticed the sounds. At first, it was just the hum of the highway far off, and the buzzing of the air conditioner. Then I heard something else, faint but sharp. Footsteps outside. Slow ones, crunching on gravel, then thudding softly against the concrete walkway that ran along the row of rooms. I froze, listening. The footsteps weren't quick like someone heading to their door. They were drawn out, steady, and they stopped directly in front of mine. My breath caught. For a long moment, there was silence, then the soft rattle of metal. The door handle. Someone was testing it just slightly, like they wanted to see if it was locked. I stayed completely still, staring at the door in the dim yellow light of the lamp. The handle twitched again, a small clink of metal, then went still. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything. After a moment, the footsteps started again, moving slowly down the row. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I told myself it was just another guest, maybe someone confused about which room was theirs. I tried to calm down, but the thought of someone trying that handle didn't sit right. I sat there in silence for what felt like an hour, staring at the door, listening for any sound. Finally, I convinced myself it was over and tried to lay back on the bed. The blanket felt rough against my skin, and the pillow smelled faintly of bleach. I closed my eyes, but every creak of the building made me flinch. Then I heard another sound. This time it wasn't the door. It was the window. The The curtains barely covered the glass, thin fabric hanging unevenly. Behind them, I heard the faint scrape of something against the glass. Not loud, but just enough to know it was intentional. My stomach turned as I realized someone was standing right outside, pressed close enough to touch the window. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Through the thin fabric, I saw it, the shadow of movement, the shape of someone shifting just beyond the glass. They lingered there for what felt like forever, not knocking, not speaking, just standing. Then the shadow slid away, and the faint crunch of gravel followed. I knew then that I couldn't stay. I pulled my shoes back on with shaking hands, grabbed my bag, and slung it over my shoulder. Every sound I made seemed too loud, but I didn't care. I went straight to the door, unlocked it as quietly as I could, and stepped out into the night air. The walkway was empty, but the parking lot felt wrong, like the shadows were thicker than they should have been. My car was only a few steps away, but those steps felt like the longest of my life. I tossed my bag into the back seat, slid into the driver's seat, and shoved the key into the ignition with trembling hands. As I started the engine, I glanced up at the row of rooms. That was when I saw it. 2 doors down from mine, one of the curtains moved. Just a small shift, but enough to know someone was there, watching. I didn't wait. I pulled out of the lot and onto the highway, the tires crunching over gravel as I went. My chest was tight, my throat dry, and I kept checking the rearview mirror to see if anyone followed. The road behind me stayed dark, but I couldn't shake the image of that curtain moving, of someone standing outside my window in the dark. I drove until the sky started to lighten, until I found another place farther down the road. A brighter motel with more cars in the lot, the kind of place that felt less empty and exposed. I parked under a floodlight and just sat there for a while, gripping the wheel, feeling the tension slowly drain out of me. I never went back to that stretch of highway again. And now, whenever I travel, I trust my gut. If a place feels wrong, too empty, too quiet, too run down, I keep driving no matter how tired I am, because that night taught me something I'll never forget. The worst thing about motels like that isn't the dirt or the smell. It's that you never know who else is there with you in the dark, waiting. I had been driving all day, pushing through long stretches of empty road that seemed to blend into each other. The sky had gone from pale blue to the heavy, dim color of evening, and my body felt like it had been pressed into the seat for too many hours. My eyes were burning, my neck stiff, and every few miles I had caught myself drifting too close to the shoulder before snapping back. I knew I couldn't push it any longer. I wasn't anywhere near a city. The map on my phone showed only smaller towns scattered along the state highway. I saw the lights first. A worn-out sign that read, "Desert Inn Motel," flickering in the distance, its neon letters buzzing against the growing dark. I didn't think twice. A cheap motel was better than falling asleep at the wheel and ending up in a ditch. Pulling into the lot, I noticed how empty it was. Just a few cars, maybe 3, spaced far apart in front of the long row of doors. The building was a single-level, flat roof, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The light above each door glowed a dull yellow, throwing strange shadows on the cracked pavement. I parked near the middle, grabbed my bag, and went into the office. The inside smelled faintly of cigarettes, even though a small "no smoking" sign was taped to the desk. The man behind the counter looked tired, barely glancing at me as I signed the paperwork and slid over my card. The process was quick, almost rushed, like he didn't care whether I stayed or not. He handed me a metal key with a cracked plastic tag and told me the room number in a flat voice. I stepped back outside and found my room halfway down the row. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and when the door swung open, a stale smell of old fabric and cleaner hit me. The carpet was thin and faded, patterned with dark stains that had long since been set. A single bed sat against the wall, covered in a floral bedspread that looked like it had been washed too many times. There was a small wooden table with a chair, a television bolted into the corner, and a bathroom tucked in the back. I tossed my bag on the chair and sat down on the bed. The mattress sagged in the middle, the springs groaning under my weight. Still, I was grateful for it. I kicked off my shoes, stretched out for a moment, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't want to think much about how dirty everything looked. I just wanted to rest. After a while, I got up, washed my face in the tiny bathroom sink, and returned to the bed. I didn't bother with the TV. The silence was heavy, the kind that made me realize just how far away I was from anywhere familiar. Outside, I could hear the faint buzz of the neon sign and the occasional car passing on the highway. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was darker. Only the dim light from the parking lot seeped through the gap in the curtain. My phone on the table read 1:14 a.m. I rolled over, trying to sink back into sleep, but something kept me awake. A sound. It wasn't loud at first, just a faint scuff, like a shoe dragging across the pavement outside my door. My body tensed. I told myself it could be another guest, maybe someone walking to their room. But then it came again, slower this time, followed by another pause. Whoever it was had stopped near my door. I held still, listening. The cheap walls of the room seemed too thin, every sound sharper than it should have been. My heart thudded in my chest. I thought I heard breathing, but I couldn't be sure if it was coming from outside or just the blood rushing in my ears. After a few minutes, the sound faded. Footsteps moved away, crunching lightly across the gravel. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Telling myself it was nothing, I shifted on the bed and tried to relax. But then, not long after, I heard it again. A slow scrape against the door. The handle rattled, just faintly, as if someone was testing it. My stomach turned cold. I sat up, staring at the door, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The chain lock was on, but the door itself looked flimsy, the kind that could be forced open without much effort. I stayed frozen, listening as the handle wiggled once more, then went still. Silence filled the room again. After what felt like forever, I heard the faint sound of footsteps moving farther away, down the row of doors. I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright, listening, staring at the crack of light under the door. My phone was in my hand, but I hesitated to call anyone. What would I even say? That someone tried the handle once? Maybe it was just a drunk guest who went to the wrong room. But deep down, I knew it hadn't felt that simple. Hours dragged by, the night stretching into a long, heavy wait. Every sound from outside made me tense. The rumble of a car passing, the creak of pipes, even the hum of the old fridge in the corner. I kept glancing at my phone, watching the minutes crawl by. When the first light of dawn crept in through the curtain, I felt a wave of relief. The room looked less threatening in the gray morning light. I gathered my bag, checked the door again, still locked, and forced myself to open it. The parking lot was quiet, empty. The few cars I had seen the night before were still there, untouched. The air was cool and smelled faintly of dust. Nothing seemed out of place, yet I couldn't shake the feeling from the night before. As I loaded my bag into the car, I noticed something near my door. The gravel outside was scuffed, the small stones pushed aside in uneven marks, as if someone had been standing there for a long time. The sight made my chest tighten again. I didn't linger. I got into the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, the motel shrank into the distance, its row of doors fading behind me. All day as I drove, I thought about that sound, the scraping at the door, the slow, deliberate rattle of the handle. Whoever it had been, they hadn't just walked by. They had stopped. They had tried to come in. And I realized then that the only thing between me and whoever stood outside was a thin door with a cheap chain lock. I thought about what might have happened if I hadn't locked it, or if I had been too tired to notice. Maybe I would have woken to someone standing over me, or maybe I wouldn't have woken at all. The more I replayed it, the more I understood how close I might have been to real danger. By the time I reached the next city, the weight of it settled in. That night at the motel wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a reminder of how vulnerable I had been. I told myself I'd never stay in a place like that again. Not if I could help it. The memory of that rattling handle followed me long after, and even now, when I stay in a hotel, I find myself checking the locks over and over, making sure the door will hold. Because I know someone out there was willing to test it, waiting for the chance that it might not. I had been on the road far longer than I planned. The trip was supposed to be easy, just a few hours of driving between towns before finding a bigger city to stay in for the night. But I had lost track of time. One gas stop turned into another, and before I realized it, it was past midnight, and I was still in the middle of nowhere. My phone's battery was low, and the map showed only a thin stretch of highway with very little else nearby. My body felt worn down from the hours of driving, and I knew I couldn't keep going much longer. That was when I saw it. A glowing sign sticking up against the black sky, flickering red and white letters spelling out Sunset Lodge, with half the bulbs burned out. I didn't care what kind of place it was. At that point, I would have slept on the floor if it meant not driving anymore. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a couple of cars sitting crooked in the gravel under yellow lights that barely pushed back the dark. The building itself was a long, one-story line of rooms with flat roofs and peeling paint. Each door had a number bolted onto it, and a curtain drawn over the window beside it. The office was lit by a single buzzing bulb, and I could see a shadow moving behind the desk inside. I went in, signed the paperwork with a hand that felt heavy, and was given a metal key with a plastic tag. The man behind the counter didn't say much, just slid it toward me and looked past me like he was ready for me to leave. The room was at the far end, close to where the lot dipped into a patch of weeds and broken fencing. When I unlocked the door, it stuck before giving way with a hard push. The smell hit me right away, musty, with a mix of old cigarette smoke buried under layers of cheap air freshener. The carpet was stained in uneven patches, and the bedspread had a faded floral pattern, frayed at the edges. A small wooden table sat against the wall with a single chair pushed under it. The bathroom door was cracked open, showing a pale sink with rust marks around the drain. I dropped my bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged in the middle, and the springs groaned under my weight. I stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the steady hum of the old air conditioner in the window. I thought about turning on the TV mounted in the corner, but I was too tired. I just wanted to close my eyes and get some rest. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was pitch black. The alarm clock on the nightstand glowed faintly red, 2:36 a.m. I lay still, trying to settle back into sleep, when I heard something that froze me. Footsteps, slow, deliberate crunches in the gravel outside my room. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another guest walking back to their car, or someone going to a vending machine. But the steps stopped right outside my door. I lay there in silence, my heart thumping so hard it seemed to echo in the room. Then came the sound of the handle, a soft metallic rattle, just enough to make the chain lock on the inside shift slightly. Every muscle in my body went stiff. Whoever it was wasn't just walking by. They were checking, testing. The handle turned again, harder this time, but the lock held. Pause followed, long and heavy. I thought I could hear faint breathing just beyond the door, slow and steady. My throat was dry, my chest tight. I stayed perfectly still, not daring to make a sound. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. The footsteps moved again, slower now, crunching along the row of rooms. I didn't move. I sat upright in bed, eyes locked on the door, waiting. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every creak of the building made me jump. I kept looking toward the window, half expecting a shadow to pass across it. I thought about getting up, grabbing my bag, and leaving right then, but the idea of opening that door terrified me even more. If someone had been outside waiting, I would have walked right into them. I stayed awake until the faint glow of morning began to seep through the curtains. The weak light made the room feel a little less threatening, but my body was stiff from sitting upright for so long. I finally worked up the nerve to stand, pull on my shoes, and grab my bag. When I opened the door, the lot was quiet. The cars were still there, unmoved. The office light was still on at the far end, though I couldn't see anyone inside. But right in front of my room, the gravel told a different story. The small stones were scuffed and pushed aside in uneven patches, like someone had been standing there for a long time, shifting their feet. I didn't linger. I loaded my bag into the car quickly, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment with the engine running. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see someone step out from behind the building. I pulled out of the lot, my chest still tight. The motel shrank in the rearview mirror, but the feeling didn't fade. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. Someone had stood outside my door in the middle of the night, trying to get in. They weren't just passing by. They were deliberate, patient, waiting for the chance that the door might open. All day as I drove, I thought about it. The thin wood of the door, the cheap chain lock, the silence of the lot. I thought about how easy it would have been if I had forgotten to lock it, or if I had been too tired to notice. The thought stayed with me, a cold reminder of how vulnerable I had been in that room. Even now, when I stay in a motel, I check the lock again and again. I drag a chair in front of the door if I can. I never let myself forget that night because I know how close I might have been to waking up with someone standing inside, or maybe not waking up at all. That was the last time I stayed in a place like that without thinking twice. The Sunset Lodge became more than just a stop on a long drive. It became a warning burned into my memory. I started hiking early that morning, before the light had fully stretched across the valley. The air was still cold, the kind that makes your breath come out in thin clouds and your fingers ache a little when you tighten your backpack straps. I had planned a long solo hike through the western trails of the Rockies, a route that curved along narrow ridges, then dipped into thick pine forests before looping back toward a small lake where I'd camp for the night. It wasn't the first time I'd done a solo hike, but I was careful, maps printed, compass packed, GPS charged, enough food and water for 2 days. Everything was in order. The trailhead was empty except for my car and the faded wooden sign that marked the route. The forest was quiet in that deep, layered way that makes every sound distinct. The crack of frost under your boots, the hum of wind through the needles, the sudden flutter of wings somewhere in the trees. I walked for hours, gaining elevation slowly, the air thinning and sharpening with every step. The higher I went, the more the silence pressed in. Around midday, I stopped near a small clearing to rest. The ground was soft with old pine needles, and a few animal tracks crossed the dirt. Mostly deer, maybe a coyote. I sat down, ate a protein bar, and checked my map. According to it, I was a little past the halfway point toward the lake. I remember thinking how still everything was, how I hadn't seen another person or even heard a plane overhead. Just quiet, thick, and endless. When I started walking again, something changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a shift in the feeling of the forest. The air felt heavier somehow, like it was holding its breath. I caught myself glancing behind me more often than usual. The trail narrowed into a rocky slope bordered by thick brush, and every so often I'd hear something faint from behind me, a noise I couldn't quite place. Maybe just branches shifting, maybe small rocks tumbling loose. I told myself it was nothing. Animals. The forest is always moving in ways we can't see. I kept hiking. The sound faded for a while, then came back, this time a little closer. It was steady, like something matching my pace. Every time I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it started again. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't want to give my own nerves more fuel. I slowed my breathing, tried to listen carefully. There were soft crunches in the dirt, small but deliberate. Too heavy for a rabbit or squirrel. Too rhythmically spaced for random movement. When I finally turned around, there was nothing. The trail was empty behind me, winding back down into the trees. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring, waiting for something to move. But the forest stayed still. I told myself again it was probably a deer, maybe even another hiker I hadn't noticed catching up. Still, I didn't like that I hadn't seen anyone since morning. I adjusted my pack and moved faster, trying to put some distance between me and that stretch of trail. By the time the light started to fade, I was still an hour or so from the lake. The forest grew denser, darker. The air lost that golden color it gets in the evening and turned a dull gray. I decided to make camp early, just off the trail in a small clearing that looked flat enough for my tent. I unpacked quietly, listening between each movement. The woods had gone almost completely silent now. No birds, no insects. Just the slow, steady rustle of wind higher up in the canopy. I ate a quick dinner and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake that feeling from earlier. Felt like something was out there, not watching in the storybook sense. More like something existing near me, moving in the same space. I lay inside the tent, the thin nylon walls fluttering with each breath of wind, and tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. Every small noise, the creak of a tree, the pop of cooling ground, made me open my eyes. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard it again. Footsteps, not loud but close, slow and deliberate, circling the edge of my camp. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. The sound moved around the tent, then stopped. A few seconds passed. Then a faint crunch, like someone stepping on pine needles a few feet away. I waited for it to move again, but it didn't. I wanted to look out, but the thought of unzipping that tent, of breaking that fragile layer between me and the dark, felt unbearable. I stayed frozen until the sounds stopped completely. When I finally drifted off, it was from pure exhaustion. The next morning, there were prints in the dirt just beyond where I'd set up my tent. They weren't boots. They were bare feet. Human, definitely, but wrong somehow, too narrow, too long. The toes left deep impressions like they'd gripped the earth. I crouched there for a long time, staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. I thought about packing up and heading straight back. But the map showed that continuing forward to the lake and looping around would be shorter than retracing the whole trail back to the car. So I packed up and moved quickly, trying not to look back. The forest felt heavier that day. My legs ached from tension as much as from the hike. Every few minutes I'd hear something behind me. A soft snap, a shift in the air, the faint thud of movement. I never saw anyone. By late afternoon, I reached the lake. It was smaller than I'd imagined, surrounded by trees that pressed close to the water's edge. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the dull gray sky. I set my pack down and walked to the edge to refill my bottle. That's when I noticed something across the water, a shape on the opposite shore. It was still at first, then moved, slow and deliberate, stepping out from behind the trees. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was tall, thin, wearing what looked like dark, torn clothing. His arms hung strangely low, and his head was tilted to one side, like his neck didn't support it right. I froze where I was. He didn't move toward me. He just stood there, staring across the lake. I don't know how long I stood there before I turned and walked back toward the trail. My body felt detached, mechanical. Every step was deliberate, quiet, like I was afraid to make a sound. When I glanced back once, he was gone. I pushed through the trail as fast as I could, ignoring my legs burning from fatigue. The sun was setting again, and the woods took on that strange blue tone where everything loses shape. I could hear movement again, fast, unsteady, coming from somewhere behind. It was far at first, then closer. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but running in that terrain would have meant tripping, falling, breaking something. I forced myself to stay steady, moving fast but careful. At one point, the trail split around a cluster of rocks. I ducked behind them, pressed myself low, and waited. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. A few seconds later, I heard the footsteps pass on the main trail. They were heavy, dragging slightly, then silence. I waited for what felt like an hour before moving again. I kept walking through the night, too afraid to stop. My flashlight beam trembled with every step. I could hear twigs snapping now and then, always behind me, never beside me. I kept thinking about those bare footprints outside my tent, the way the toes had dug in like something crawling on the ground. When the first light of morning came through the trees, I was already near the lower part of the ridge. The trail widened there, sloping down toward the valley. I could see the faint line of the dirt road that led back to the parking lot. Relief hit so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. I kept moving, not looking back, not thinking. When I finally reached my car, I didn't stop to rest. I threw my gear in the back and drove. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the keys. I kept glancing in the mirrors the whole way out, half expecting to see someone walking along the road behind me. I didn't stop until I hit the first town an hour later. I sat in a gas station parking lot for a long time, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself that what I saw was just another person. Someone strange, maybe dangerous, but human. That was easier to believe than the alternative, though I didn't know what the alternative even was. When I checked my map later, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The stretch where I'd camped wasn't on the main loop trail after all. It branched off into an old, disused route that hadn't been maintained in years. I must have missed the marker when I was hiking and followed the wrong path. I looked it up when I got home, about that section of forest. There'd been reports years ago of a man living out there, completely off-grid. People had found his camps, old traps, makeshift shelters. The last report was from almost a decade ago. No one ever caught him or confirmed anything. I think about that night sometimes, about those prints in the dirt, about how close those sounds came to my tent. I wonder if he was watching the whole time, waiting. Maybe he was just curious, maybe something else. I'll never know. I still hike sometimes, but never alone. And every time the forest goes quiet like that, I feel it again, that heavy stillness, that sense that something could be standing just out of sight, watching from the trees, waiting for the light to fade.